Well, good morning, everyone, or maybe it's good afternoon or good evening. I know we have a very global audience on today's web panel discussion. My name is Jerry Boyer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Harmonized Mobility and one of its founders. And I'd like to welcome everybody on the call today. Harmonized Mobility develops systems to connect and integrate ride-hailing and public transit. We focus on kind of real-time coordination at the sidewalk and curb and global standards. And today we're here to really talk about some of the deep work that we're doing in course training and development around how we plan for the future. So I'm really thrilled that you're all here with us today. A couple of housekeeping items. You're going to have the ability to ask questions throughout today's presentation. The questions, I guess, drop down can be found in the GoToWebinar control panel. Just click on that questions link and type your question in there. And at the appropriate time, I will read them out and we can get through them. We'll do our very best to answer all of your questions today. And what else can I tell you? We're going to hear from both Carlos and Bern. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation for you. So once again, thanks for being here. We're gonna end right on time. So we're planning to be done in just a little bit less than 1 hour from now. And I think I've told you everything I need to tell you right now. So. Let me tell you a little bit about my fellow panelists here today. First of all, Carlos Hogan. Wave hello to everyone, Carlos. Yeah,
hi, everyone.
Carlos is founder of Supervan, an autonomous minivan solution providing home-to-rail services in suburban areas. Supervan is set to leapfrog today's autonomous vehicles limitations to provide an affordable, efficient, and financially self-sustainable solution for suburban transportation authorities and operators. That's convenient enough to encourage suburban commuters to switch to public transport. I also have thanks, and I also have Bern Grush. Say hello, wave.
Hello, everybody.
Hi. So Bern Grush, he's my partner at Harmonized Mobility and the Chief Innovation Officer at the company. He's an automated fleet strategist with Grush Niles Strategic as well. He's an inventor, an entrepreneur, and Bern also co-authored The End of Driving Transportation Systems and Public Policy Planning for Autonomous Vehicles. It's a very deep textbook-oriented read, and I think every planner should have this on their desk. He was named Toronto Star Wheels Newsmaker of the Year for his research on vehicle automation, and a Maclean's Magazine editorial called his work fascinating and carefully argued. I could go on about Bern, but right now I think I'm going to pass the presentation capability on to Bern. And Bern, can you just take us to the next step, please? Actually, before we do that, I'm going to try and launch a poll just to test the technology, because one of the things that we do here is we have to also run the technology. So I'm going to just launch this poll and see if we there we go. Following COVID-19 is the arrival of autonomous vehicles. Please select one of the following, everyone. There's still input coming. All right, it looks like most people have voted. We're at 60–70% right now. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The poll is closing. All right, I'm just going to share the results of that just to give you a little bit of context of what people are thinking.
Very interesting.
It is interesting.
I agree. Okay, so this gives us a little bit of context. Nobody thinks it's impossible, which is great news. Okay, Bernd, now it's your...
I should have been able to vote because I might have tipped that the other way. Thank you. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining, and I'm just going to talk briefly about a few ideas about how we can move forward, and then turn back over to Carlos for a more immediate conversation about some technologies that are available now. So I really are talking about how it is that we can behave now to get to be most likely to achieve the kinds of things that we think we can achieve with automated vehicles. It's certainly pretty well recognized now that we have no reliable picture of how automated vehicles will occur in deployment. We have a lot of ideas about what they might look like or how we might imagine using them and so forth. But when we get to scale at, say, 25% or 90% of all the passenger kilometers traveled or all the goods kilometers traveled, if they, as we get to those high rates of scale of deployment, there's been a lot of reports over the past 5 years that have projected these two extremes of 25 to 90%. That might occur sometime between 2030 and 2050. But what does that look like? We have lots of ideas and hopes about the technology itself, and we may be impatient for those to come to fruition, but there's no argument that says we understand exactly how this will roll out. The best advice, and well developed on the book that Jerry mentioned on the right, and I repeat it here, is that we ought to decide what we would like to have happen and then proceed to design our processes, our cities, our regulations, and our deployments to achieve that. Whatever our fears and expectations, we generally focus on the technology that we expect or hope to be coming. It is exciting, of course, and it seems to offer opportunities to solve many of the deeply embedded problems that we have with motorized mobility today, but the technology itself is only a tiny fraction of the entire automobility system that we must consider. The greater part of the system, and this has been true for 125 years, is its entire deployment, not just the vehicles. If you consider all motorized mobility over the last 125 years, it includes, besides the vehicles, things like fuels, roads, death rates, climate change, war, and many, many other aspects of a whole system. You cannot understand 20th century automobility by interviewing drivers or studying an engine. Similarly, you cannot understand vehicle automation by asking today's car owners their purchase opinions or by explaining AI to transit planners. And if we want things to turn out well, to avoid many of the existing system faults, or at least not to let things get worse, then we need to establish ways to use this technology to achieve three key changes: less congestion, less CO2 and pollution, and fewer deaths. These three changes are addressed by three technologies, now known as the three revolutions: shared, electric, and automated. Often described together along with connectivity as a cluster of related technologies, these three are separate, independent technologies. None of these three need the other two, and that's key to our best path forward. We already share vehicles and rides to a limited degree. Exclusive of public transit, non-family sharing amounts to perhaps 2% of the trips in the developed world. We do most of that in non-electric and non-automated vehicles. We already have a number of electric vehicles. Most of these are privately owned, and a tiny fraction are partly automated. And we have a small number of partially automated vehicles, most of which are privately owned, and only some of which are electric. In any case, partly automated is not what we're talking about, when we talk about automated or autonomous. The key point is that we should be doing much more to encourage the first two, shared and electric. These two revolutions have tremendous value, and we perversely and unnecessarily drag our feet or even inhibit both of these changes. One danger we face is that automation will arrive when only a tiny fraction of us have made the social change needed to share, to stop feeling we must own a personal vehicle in order to have reliable mobility. If automation arrived today, the great majority of families would not be willing to shift from buying cars to buying rides. Most families don't know how to be zero-car families. We should be going to extremes to increase the proportion of zero-car families in urban and shortly after that in suburban settings. And we are not doing that. Another danger we face is that automation will arrive before we have a dense, reliable, fast-charging power network, and the social understanding that that network is as reliable as gas stations have been for the past 125 years. We know we are close technically and within reach geographically, but we are nowhere near socially and psychologically for most North American motorists. Our attempts to get us there have been halting at best. We need to address the barriers to shared and electric, and yes, automated, starting now. If we addressed all the barriers to shared and electric, but full automation never arrived, we would still be immensely better off. Sure, automation would be helpful, but automation does not address congestion. Transit, active transportation, and sharing address congestion. Yes, automation could be deployed to possibly make vehicle sharing more likely, but if culturally we're unable or unwilling to share vehicles, automation is not going to change that. The same thing holds for electrification. If affordable, full automation arrived this afternoon, many of us would consider purchasing such a vehicle for ourselves, and most of us who would consider that today would choose the gas model. Of course, affordable full automation is very far off, but so too are programs that would move us rapidly away from the internal combustion engine. The need to free up the potential of shared and electric automobility from the bonds of waiting for automation. We need to do that now. There's tremendous value today to moving to a much greater degree of vehicle sharing and to a program of moving rapidly toward all-electric passenger and urban goods fleets. Just yesterday I read that it was announced that by 2025, all of California will require their goods vehicles to be electric, for example. That's a good move. Not only would we reap immediate benefits from these changes, but when automation did arrive, and it does not matter when, we would actually be ready for it. Waiting for automation instead of getting down to the business of fleet electrification and reducing the ratio of privately owned and leased vehicles is our greatest error. When we arrive at automation, if we already have a population that prefer electric vehicles, prefers mobility as a service, prefers active transportation, prefers transit over vehicle ownership, then we have at least a slim hope of arriving in our preferred world of less congestion, less parking, less pollution, less CO2, and less carnage. If we simply keep waiting for automation, none of this utopia will happen. While I try to focus our students on sharing and electrification independently of automation, I do not suggest that we ignore planning for automation. For example, there are international standards under development for managing robotaxis and automated goods movement at the curb. And the City of Toronto has developed a list of 78 tactics that they have identified as worthy of ongoing preparation. These kinds of activities are suitable now, but do not let them distract you from finding ways to lower vehicle ownership and the electrification of our fleet. Thank you, and let me give the screen over to Carlos, who will describe some of the early potential for automation with his work.
Thanks a lot, Bern. I'm just going to for presentation capability over to Carlos. Let's make sure I find him. Got it. And while we're doing that, I just also want to remind everybody that we that basically 90% of the people on the call today agree that autonomous vehicles are likely, highly likely, or unavoidable. And really, the conversation today, you know, to kind of dovetail what Bern just talked about into, you know, Carlos's presentation is, you know, there are things that we can do today to prepare and to make this happen. And one of the questions that was typed into our questions panel is, the question is really irrelevant without a time frame. And so what we're talking about is what you can do today to make this happen. And with that, I think I'll pass it on to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks a lot. I'm really thrilled to be here with our audience today, because I'm actually in the place where autonomous vehicle research started in France a long time ago, in 1991. Actually, it happened in here, and what you see in the back is it's not a picture. It's I'm really here. And what you see there is actually a small two-passenger pod that was designed in 1996. So you see this dates back to a long time ago. And the yellow one in the back, actually I wanted to share a video with you to show you what we've done with this vehicle. So what you're seeing is basically things that happened since in the 1990s in France and in Europe around deploying and testing autonomous vehicles in cities, because they say that the focus in Europe was always to improve mobility with these technologies, and not just you know, make technology fits or something like that. So so I will, well, I have a lot of stuff to say, but time is short. I will start with giving you a picture of mobility in Paris. Why? Because basically we went through the full lockdown between March and June, and this gives a nice glimpse of what's happening and what must be in cities' minds at this point. So just to give you a quick overview of Paris, basically. Oh, sorry. So the Paris region, actually the metropolitan area of Paris, is a 150 kilometers diameter area. So what you see in the lower side of the picture, so this is Paris, basically the central area where there are 2 million inhabitants, and this is basically where you would come to visit the Eiffel Tower and so on. The second area around Paris is an area of 50 kilometers diameter, and is where the most of the population lives. Is an area with 8 million inhabitants, and then you have the more suburban area, which goes between 50 and 150 kilometers of diameter. So what was the mobility in Paris before COVID? Basically, I just took the commuter trips, so home office trips, which represented 46% of the 43 million trips that are done every weekday. And as you see here, in the central area of Paris, there's a huge share of use of public transport. But as soon as you start moving out to the outskirts, that share decreases in favor of the private car, of the private individual car. So there's actually a very interesting survey that was done on the 2 weeks of June 8th until June 17th by a consulting firm called Inov 360, and they found that at that time, so that's 1 week before the end of the complete lockdown, where schools were partially operating, 41% of people still worked at home, so 41% of the people they interviewed online, and 36% of the people were working part-time. At that time, congestion was minus 35% from its normal condition, let's say, before the pandemic and the lockdown. And what's interesting is to see what changed happened in the behavior of people. And as you see here, so people started using started using much more the car, depending on the area. So in the central area of Paris, where there's much less use of private cars, this is a lower number. But in the suburbs where public transport or the quality of public transport is much lower, people turn massively towards the car. And on the other hand, they completely or massively as well declared using public transport less or not anymore. So I think this gives a picture of what cities should be concentrating right now. So trying to bring people back into transit and trying to avoid Carmageddon from out of the pandemic. So going back to autonomous vehicles or automated, I took this, I borrowed this slide from Bern because it basically is what people have been seeing for the past 5 or 8 years, and is the automation level. So why I use this just to have a common ground. So what does this mean? Basically, in reality, there are only 2 real differences in this level. So basically, below level 3, you have a driver on board of the vehicle, which has to be present and, let's say, be able to take the wheel at any time. And automation, let's say, happens partially. But this is really requiring the presence of the driver. After level 4, so level 4 and 5 is really levels where there's no driver needed for the vehicle to go from A to B, basically. Why does this matter? Basically, for cities, it matters a lot. When you're talking about levels under 3, so level 1, 2, and 3 of automation, basically this is oriented towards private car ownership, and this is cities, I think, is something that they really have to understand. And level 5, on the other hand, is a vehicle that's capable of going from A to B anywhere. So probably traveling, going from Shanghai to Paris in one shot, and all over the conditions that it will encounter. So it's probably something that's really far off. So what does really matter for cities actually in terms of this level is level 4. This is really the only level that's relevant to improve public transport and urban mobility. And why? Because as Bernd said in the beginning, this has an impact on the operating cost of mobility services. And this is why this is basically the only level that cities should be concentrating on if they want to really focus on mobility. So what's the state of autonomous vehicles today? We have 2 types of applications. Bern would call it 2 markets. So we have a market on the left side, which are shared autonomous vehicles. So shared ride, it means. So you would go on the vehicle with other people, and it's probably something that's city-led. So cities have the power to manage how these systems are introduced because of many aspects. On the other hand, we have single occupancy autonomous vehicles, which are more industry-led. I will speak about those later. So on the shared ride autonomous vehicles, on the left-hand side, you have level 4 high-speed autonomous vehicles, which are actually commercial since 1999. And basically they have a very specific application. So it's something, for example, to connect 2 points at high speed, and this would require a separate infrastructure, so physical protection of the track where they operate. On the other hand, we have the level 3 low-speed autonomous shuttles. And why I say level 3? Because they still require an attendant. But this is basically what cities would really need, I mean, to improve mobility. But I'll go back to this afterwards. On the single occupancy autonomous vehicle, you see a date. Actually, the date in which there were made two announcements. The first is the approval of hands-free motorway driving that was made legal in 25 countries. So what does this mean? Basically, it's level 2, level 3 autonomous vehicles being made legal, so authorized on motorways. So this is basically private autonomous vehicles getting closer to a real market, and this is led by the industry as well. The other announcement that happened in June 25th is the partnership between Waymo and Volvo. And why does this matter? Because their intention is basically to do driverless TNC, so basically do something that Uber or Lyft do today without drivers. What's the issue with this is that basically imagine having Uber vehicles at much lower cost. So this can have a massive impact. Cities have a good experience of what happened when these TNC services started in 10 years ago, more or less. And so this is the kind of impact that can be much stronger. So this is the first action or recommendation that I would give. The first is to get training to understand the applications and impact of each type of autonomous vehicles that I mentioned. So each of these has a very different impacts, and especially those that are industry-led. Well, cities have not much leverage on that. So the second action that I would suggest is to prepare policies to limit the negative impacts of single occupancy autonomous vehicles, because basically this will be used by individual users, and so there will be no shared. And well, cities have a very good understanding of what that means in terms of impact. So the way to prepare for that is to really see that this is coming and try to foresee that, but cities have no leverage on the, let's say, on the calendar of this going to market. So going back to, let's say, autonomous shuttles, the video that I showed you in the beginning basically showed research that was done in Europe between 2000 and 2016. During that period, we were doing autonomous research pilot services. So these were meant for citizens and city officials. And we carried in that period something like 60,000 passengers. We did that in 16 cities, 16 European cities. So we have very a wide variety of users and contexts, and in 9 European countries. And we did something like more than 2,000 interviews. So there are several documents that are available. What cities should understand about this is that these low-speed shuttles were basically prototypes to do research, and they were not meant to be, let's say, commercial autonomous vehicles. So I'll get back to that, but just to give you a glimpse of the requirements that we used to set for cities to deploy these research pilots. Basically, we would select maximum 2 kilometers routes in pedestrian or low traffic streets. That because we had to keep the speed low because of safety, simply. We also requested as much as possible infrastructure protection or adaptation, and of course onboard staff. So this would be level 3, let's say. And of course, there were no investment costs for cities because this was covered by European innovation funding. So what's the fact is that present-day low-speed shuttles are based on these requirements. They are, let's say, of course, advancing little by little, but what you have in the market is basically based on these performances that were done, as I said again before, for research. What's the impact of this when you move this to commercial application? Basically, if you operate in a let's say in 2 kilometers routes, basically you're only providing a small mileage and a small capacity, and in terms of passenger capacity. I mean, if you require the infrastructure protection or adaptation, well, this is more like a chicken and egg problem. So which technology should cities deploy to allow these systems to get into the market? So and also this has economic very strong economic implications when you try to use research prototypes for commercial services. In terms of the low speed and the small routes, basically what you get as a result is a very high cost per kilometer and very limited revenues for the system. When you go to the infrastructure protection and adaptation, basically you're probably making a hazardous investment because you don't really know what's going to happen in terms of vehicles that will come into the market. And of course, let's say the issue that has the highest implication is having onboard staff, because that also increases the cost per kilometer. And of course, when there's no let's say innovation funding, well, the whole investment is on the city. So that's something also to consider. So basically, the conclusion on this is that low-speed shuttles, level 3 low-speed shuttles, are basically not commercial transport tools, just research tools. So the third action that I would advise is for cities to be aware that these are basically research tools for socioeconomic research. So if that's your intention of doing a trial, well, you have to be very much aware of that. But don't expect transport performance from this, or financial sustainability from a trial. On the other hand, there's extensive documentation on the research that was done between 2000 and 2016 on social acceptance, on the economics, and urban transport planning. So I think the first thing would be to really try to understand this, because it was, as I said again, carried out in a large, diverse environments, and this is well, something that's much cheaper than doing a low-speed shuttle trial. I think now that we have a poll question, Jerry.
Yes, I believe we do. Let me call that poll out right now.
Yeah, and the question is if your city is planning a low-speed shuttle trial sometime in the future. Jerry, I let you decide when to call back.
Yeah, right now we're at about 45% answered. So people are really thinking about this.
You should have probably put the poll out before, before Carlos spoke.
Yeah, right.
Some very powerful points you've made, Carlos.
Thanks.
Yeah. Next time we'll do it before and after.
Yeah, exactly, before and after.
Well, I don't think the plants are running. I mean, they will change because of this, but well, probably you have more data to consider.
Well, there's lots of other sort of political reasons, and we need to get our hands dirty reasons and so on.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, it looks like voting has slowed to a crawl, so I'm going to close the poll and reveal the results. And there we are.
Okay. Okay, very interesting.
It is very interesting. Huh.
Once again.
And very, very spread.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
So
I'll hide the results.
Sorry?
I'm going to just take those results down and send it back to you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So basically, which performance should a city-friendly autonomous solution meet in reality? I mean, how to move beyond these low-speed shuttle experiments in Paris and elsewhere? Basically, I think that what cities need to look is really to establish goals of what they want with this technology. Basically, automation, as I said, is something to reduce the cost of operating transit, and so if that's the case, probably the focus on, at least in terms of geography, should be areas with elevated car use, which are basically the suburbs, and this is applicable for Paris and I mean everywhere in let's say Western Europe and also North America. Because this is where this is probably an indicator that there is transit poverty, and people are just using cars because they have no other choice. This is very much what we have seen in Europe, not only in Paris but in many cities in Europe. The scope should, I think, should really be to increase the modal share of sustainable modes, and especially transit, by providing better travel times than a car, and probably and hopefully a greater convenience to, let's say, to push people, to motivate people. I don't believe much in enforcing and mandating people to change their behavior, because if they do, it's just their choice. But I think if you provide a more convenient commute, people will simply switch. And we saw that during the lockdown and after. And the third point is, of course, full integration with public transport in terms of cost, time sinking. I mean, everything should be absolutely seamless so that people can really use public transport. And of course, it should be financially self-sustainable. So I'll get a little bit more into that. So basically, what should be the performance? So basically, as opposed to the low-speed shuttles example I presented before, the cost should be as low as possible, and this is actually the advantage of automation. Hopefully, equal or even lower than the revenues that the system can provide, with the better performance and with a low investment for the city. So how to get that? Well, the first point is to operate at a high speed. Sorry, that's really something that brings the cost per kilometer down and increases the system capacity and therefore the revenues of the system. The second is no onboard staff. So if if we really want this to improve mobility, we need to, or to lower the cost, is we need to get rid of onboard attendants, and of course be more convenient than the car. As I said, to motivate people to switch. The second, in terms of performance, is to operate not only on point-to-point lines, but on road networks. And because especially if you think of suburbs, the demand is so spread that if you simply put a line, it will not be really useful to attract people out of the cars. So you need to operate on a road network. And in terms of investment, well, the real issue is to avoid this chicken and egg situation, in which so the system should require no infrastructure protection or adaptation, and hopefully to avoid let's say investment from the city, be provided as a service solution. So the fourth, let's say, and last action that I would recommend to cities is to really identify the problems they want to solve. And so is it really in the city centers that we need autonomous shuttles? Do we have the problem of, I mean, do we have a good share of people using public transport, and will that improve that or not? Or is it really in the suburbs? The second is to define your metropolitan area's ambitions, because the real, I mean, the good scale to look at this is a metropolitan area, not just a city. You need to work both on the on congestion and pollution, and at the same time keep what's good in the central areas where you have probably better transit services. And the final recommendation would be to trial only if it really improves the service performance. So, for example, the system capacity or the door-to-door travel time. So with that, I'll just, I think, yeah, we have another poll question, Jerry. So
yes, indeed we do.
I give it back to you.
All right, we're going to just launch this poll.
Final question.
Okay, which actions could your city implement in the next 6 to 12 months to prepare for autonomous mobility? Select one or more of the following.
How many respondents do we have?
We're at 50% so far and climbing.
Okay.
Okay. Looks like we still have voters coming in. That's good.
Great.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to shut it down in 5 seconds. Get your votes in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Great. Oh, I lost the screen. What do we have? Okay, very interesting. I think those are very good actions. The majority has indicated.
Mm-hmm.
I really think training is really a critical issue. I mean, because you cannot start planning or doing anything without really a deep understanding of the implications.
Yeah, agreed.
But this is very, very interesting. Okay, so with that, just a word about what we do. So as Jerry presented in the beginning, at Suburban, we are developing, sorry, I get it. Autonomous minivans to connect housing and office and commercial destinations to suburban railway stations, so commuter rail, in a 10-minute radius. So basically, the idea is to provide commuters a solution to really switch to public transport, at least those who go to the central areas of large metropolitan areas, and well, also small. And with that, that's it. So thanks a lot for your attention, and if we have questions.
Thank you,
Jerry.
Carlo. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch the presenter back over to Bern for a second here. And I'm going to go to the questions and remind everybody on the call, if you have questions, to type them into the questions drop down. So one of the questions that I have right here is, can the decks be shared? And the answer to that is yes, we will share that material following this event. The web panel discussion is also being recorded, and so we will make that recording available to everybody on the call as well when it is successfully downloaded and loaded onto our YouTube channel. Okay, so here I have a question from Michael Roschlau. Suburban focus seems to be on last kilometer type service to feed suburban rail systems. That assumes many trips are CBD oriented. What about the potential for many cross suburban trips?
What about, sorry? I didn't get
the potential for the many cross suburban trips.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we decided to start something that was doable in the short term, and we think that operating at 10 kilometers from a railway stations already solves some problems. We cannot solve everything, and I think that's probably one of the most difficult problems to solve in transportation, and that calls for probably the relevance of private car ownership for some time still. But until then, I think we have to start somewhere, and I think that's a good point to start, because there's a large part of where the congestion comes, and when it comes in dense areas. So where it affects large amounts of population. So I think that's a good starting point. So probably in the future, those suburb to suburb trips can be tackled. But yeah, we decided to start somewhere, and that's why we chose these places.
I have another question from Kat Clark. What would be the benefit to an AV model of car sharing as opposed to the traditional car share model, i.e. enterprise car share, virtual car, etc.?
Well, actually, this is in the video I showed, and probably I can put it back. I don't know if I'm presenting or not.
You are not. I can make you present.
Just the first part of the video. Let me put my presentation back. Okay. So actually, the automation, what you see here is the first attempt of applying automation to car sharing. It's a very brief part of the video that I showed, but basically the goal there was to, car sharing was already identified as a solution in the 90s. But there was the issue of the fleet redistribution. So you have the problem that vehicles concentrate in a place, and then you have to use, or you need to have a large workforce to put them back where they are needed. So this was one of the early applications. Yeah, that's it's difficult today to think of such an application at city level, at very large scale level, just because of the availability of the technology that's capable of doing that. Yeah, that's an option, but there is the issue of how I mean, the technology that's required for that is still not available.
Perfect. So I just maybe provide an opportunity, Bern and Carlos, do you have questions of each other? I always like to let the panelists, after they've heard each other's presentation, ask questions.
So I think the question that was asked about other trips within a suburban area, in other words, trips that would not necessarily connect to the train, I think that's an important issue. Carlos, what do you see as what's in the way of getting? I understand why we're focused on first last mile to rail first. That's very clear why we're doing that first. What kinds of barriers do you think we have to overcome to look at that broader demand, suburban demand?
Well, I think the real difficulty is not even from the technology standpoint. It's more from the because it's really difficult to put two people in suburbs, so in low density areas, sparsely located, to travel at the same time to the same place or a similar place. I mean, Uber and Lyft having tried to do that, and well, they succeed at a certain level, but really the issue is that that makes your trip longer, and really is a very, I mean, is a very difficult transportation problem. I mean, it hasn't been solved so far. So despite all the large funding that companies may have, this is probably the most difficult problem in transportation to fit several people in a trip.
Right. Well, we solve that problem now with a private vehicle, of course.
Yeah.
If autonomous vehicles were smaller, I'm talking about very small, two-person vehicles, for example, sized vehicles, and they were electric and they were managed to be optimized, is that not an improvement over single car occupant personal ownership?
Yeah, but I mean, you know that the people buy the car for their greatest need. So if they're traveling once a year, I mean, you have to provide a complete solution that will solve that problem of going for holidays once a year with another solution. So,
but if most of your trips can be handled with a small vehicle, then of course some of your special needs could be handled with a larger vehicle and so forth. It's also the case that if we can handle 95% of your needs with a small vehicle that you don't own, then if you must have a vehicle for a special purpose, then you can lease or rent that vehicle for that day or that vacation, or tow your boat to the.
And that's already possible today. I mean,
exactly.
Car sharing is not very much available in suburbs. Well, at least in Europe, it's mostly concentrated in dense areas. So it's not happening yet.
Well, it is important for us all to understand that the autonomous technology that we're promised, or we have heard, would have 90 or 95% of us using autonomous vehicles that we do not own by 2030 or 2040. This is very unlikely, especially because of the kinds of problems that you're pointing to. So we need to be cautious about what we think we can do with this technology.
Yeah, but I think you have to start. I think cities should separate the transportation need from the automation. Automation can be done in specific areas more easily than in a, let's say, broad perspective or general purpose. Something that you would do, as I said, to travel from Shanghai to Paris. But but really for local applications, you should separate, start with transport economics. I mean, that's the starting point, and it applies to this with the value that you can lower the operating cost, and then it opens new possibilities for transit in terms of applications and vehicle sizes, as you said.
Yeah, good point. I want to draw everybody's attention to the slide that's showing right now. It is an outline of the course that Harmonized Mobility has been holding now for well over, I guess, almost 2 years now. Now, what I want to point everybody's attention to really is that this course is going to be available online in the fall. 50% of the people on the call today identified training as a priority, and so this is one of the things that we're developing now. So Bern and I have been delivering this course face to face for a couple of years, and we've delivered it in Barcelona and Vancouver and Dubai, and with Sidewalk Labs in Toronto and other places. And what we, our experience with COVID-19 was, well, that's not going to happen anymore. But we started to do education and training and webinars online, and realized that we could actually create a richer and more engaging experience with online, where we can bring in guest and expert speakers such as Carlos that are actually practitioners on the ground making things happen in the world. We can offer online pre-recorded material available on demand, and we will also do instructor-led and recorded sessions. And we can have open dialogues such as this. We have the ability to network with global colleagues that are working in similar areas. So it's a really interesting thing. So what we're working on right now, and we have all the material in the network, is we're going to bring this course online in the fall of 2020, and we'll be communicating with everybody on the call. If it's of value to you, certainly we'd like to get more feedback on what would be helpful, and so you'll be hearing from us. So I think that's enough of that marketing message for now. I do have some more questions. I do have another question from Michael Rochlau. I think it's very appropriate for what's going on today. With fears arising from COVID, are small van or pod type AVs still realistic? Do we need larger vehicles for better onboard distancing?
Vern, do you want to answer that? Your mic is off.
Vern, you're muted.
Sorry, that's a very important question. Thank you for that. There's a lot of ideas about vehicle design. These are small vehicle designs, vehicles that would carry 4 or 6 people, such that there are isolated cabins within those vehicles. That is one kind of approach for social distancing in small vehicles. So that it's kind of wasteful to have a very large vehicle, such as the size of a bus or a minibus that has room for only 2 passengers because of social distancing. So it would be highly appropriate to look at smallish vehicles with 4 or 6 people with internal compartments. That's one potential solution. I myself, because of the requirement to wear masks, I use TNCs now. The driver's always wearing a mask. I'm always wearing a mask. I'm not 6 feet away. I'm probably more like 3.5 or 4 feet away, but it feels safer because of the care that's given in that case. Now, if you have a vehicle that has 2 or 3 people in it wearing masks, can you trust everyone to wear a mask and so forth? That's an important element as well. But vehicle design and social care are valuable elements to help in that area.
So I'm at.
Go ahead, Carlos.
30 seconds. Yeah, we've of course we've thought of this, and we are designing a completely or 99% contactless travel experience. through, for example, opening the vehicle with your smartphone, or complete disinfection of the vehicle when after each trip. So I think those are manual things, and you can also think of cabin designs as well to avoid, or to let's say to avoid this risk.
Perfect. Okay, everyone, we've reached the 1 hour mark. First of all, thank you very much, Carlos, for being with us today, and Bern, thank you very much for being part of this. And most of all, thank everybody else on the call. We really appreciate you being with us and spending an hour of your time on this really important conversation. And we look forward to seeing you again sometime in the near future. Wishing you all the best. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.